Signori e signori, buonasera, benvenuti e inizierei lasciando la parola al Rettore dell'Università per un indirizzo di saluto e all'assessore all'innovazione del Comune di Udine per il benvenuto dell'amministrazione comunale. Innanzitutto al professore De Toni.
Bentrovati a tutti, io sono molto orgoglioso oggi di avere qui Ian Tattersall, che è uno diciamo dei più importanti studiosi al mondo in tema di evoluzionismo. Il tema è estremamente misterioso, diciamo la verità, noi viviamo dentro un mistero, che è la nostra evoluzione, e quindi un motivo in più per ascoltarlo, visto che è uno dei più qualificati. Voglio dire che sono stato ben 2 volte a New York al museo da lui diretto. È stata un'esperienza, la prima così affascinante, che la seconda l'ho voluto fare con i miei figli e mia moglie, e quindi consiglio a tutti, se capita, di andare a vedere, perché è una delle realtà più importanti sul piano appunto degli studi. È un caso molto bello dove il museo diventa anche un luogo di ricerca, e quindi sotto la guida di Ian Tattersall questo è diventato uno dei musei più importanti al mondo. Sono molto contento di averlo qui a Udine. L'abbiamo già avuto anni fa, il professor Vianello, che ringrazio, l'aveva già invitato a Udine, e l'altra volta l'abbiamo fatto al Salone del Castello. Io ero solo un semplice professore, quando sono arrivato era tutto pieno, sono rimasto fuori, quindi ho detto questa volta spero di poterlo ascoltare di persona, e infatti un posto c'è. Quindi abbiamo voluto farlo qui nella nostra splendida sede a scuola superiore, perché siamo anche al piano terra e possiamo ospitare anche le persone in piedi. Sapevamo che il suo nome avrebbe richiamato molte persone. Non tolgo spazio perché vogliamo sentire tutti lui. Complimenti al mio delegato alla cultura, professor Nazzi, che sta secondo me portando una grande opportunità per la città. Grazie ovviamente ancora, e ovviamente grazie anche a Tattersall, e vi chiedo subito un applauso di benvenuto a lui. Grazie a Ian.
Grazie al magnifico Rettore e il dottor Giacomini in rappresentanza del Comune.
Buonasera a tutti, è davvero un piacere vedervi così numerosi. Ormai questa rassegna Aperture ha un successo sempre maggiore, questo è un bellissimo segnale, perché vuol dire che la città di Udine risponde bene a queste iniziative. Anch'io saluto il professore, è un onore averla qua appunto a Udine, saluto tutte le autorità accademiche, il Rettore, il Prorettore, il professor Nazzi, Vianello, con cui mi congratulo per questa iniziativa, e saluto anche il direttore dei nostri musei, dei musei civici per quanto riguarda la storia naturale, Muscio, che appunto ha collaborato a questa importante iniziativa. Fra l'altro è un momento simbolico importante proprio perché sono i 150 anni del nostro museo friulano di storia naturale, che è nato appunto nel 1866, Udine è capitale, diciamo così, della biodiversità in Italia, ha un largo spettro di specie, ha un patrimonio importante, e per questo 150 anni siamo riusciti anche come amministrazione, come città, a fare un regalo a questo museo. Finalmente abbiamo trovato una sede, che è la sede dell'ex macello, che è in via Sabadini, che finalmente riuscirà a raccogliere, a valorizzare in maniera degna il patrimonio che è della città, e che appunto è a disposizione di tutti. L'incontro di oggi, appunto questo incontro in collaborazione fra città, fra Comune di Udine e università, è un segnale, un simbolo appunto dell'importanza di una relazione sempre più profonda fra fondamentale. L'Università di Udine è importantissima per la città, io credo che sia una delle istituzioni che caratterizza di più la città di Udine, quindi è importante che ci sia questa relazione sempre più stretta fra il patrimonio della città, che è un patrimonio importante, e poi le capacità, le conoscenze, l'università ne è ricca, che possono valorizzare questo patrimonio a beneficio di tutta la cittadinanza.
Entriamo nel vivo del nostro programma scientifico. Sono certo che molti di voi hanno sentito pronunciare già questa frase che è attribuita ad Einstein, che dice che 2 cose sono infinite, la stupidità umana e l'universo, e non sono del tutto sicuro della seconda. La frase evidentemente è molto simpatica e anche molto amara, Però il fatto stesso che sia stata pronunciata da un genio del calibro di Einstein ci fa capire come non solo la stupidità umana, ma anche l'intelligenza dell'uomo è capace di raggiungere delle vette elevatissime. In buona sostanza, la nostra mente è qualcosa che ci rende radicalmente diversi dagli altri milioni di specie animali che popolano il nostro pianeta, e comprese le centinaia di specie dell'ordine dei primati con cui siamo più strettamente imparentati. Ma siccome fa parte della nostra natura porci domande, è importante chiedersi: ma da dove vengono queste straordinarie capacità della nostra mente? Da chi le abbiamo ereditate? Attraverso quali meccanismi le abbiamo eventualmente perfezionate? Sono chiaramente delle domande cruciali che meriterebbero di stare al centro di ogni programma di ricerca, perché hanno a che vedere con la nostra stessa natura. Per fortuna stasera con noi abbiamo Ian Tattersall, curatore emerito del Museo Americano di Storia Naturale di New York, che affronterà questo tema a partire dalla sua esperienza pluridecennale di paleoantropologo, che l'ha condotto in ogni angolo di questo pianeta e per 2 volte già anche ad Udine, per nostra fortuna. E lui stasera ci aiuterà a arrampicarci lungo l'albero della vita, su fino al ramo dei primati, attraverso il cespuglio piccolo degli ominidi, fino in cima al ramo che finisce con l'Homo Sapiens, in cerca di tracce di fenomeni, di quegli eventi che ci hanno resi così particolari, se possibile. E quindi adesso è un onore per me innanzitutto cedere la parola al direttore del Museo Friulano di Storia Naturale per 2 parole di benvenuto in occasione di questo evento e delle celebrazioni del 150° anniversario. Poi ascolteremo un'introduzione del professor Vianello, il quale praticamente procurerà che siamo equipaggiati a dovere per affrontare questa specie di viaggio culturale con Ian Tattersall attraverso la scoperta del pensiero simbolico e del linguaggio nell'uomo. Dunque la parola a Giuseppe Muscio e poi al professor Vianello e infine al nostro ospite Ian Tattersall.
Innanzitutto vi ringrazio per essere qui, per essere molti. Il successo si misura dal numero di persone presenti, ma si misurerà dopo dalla chiacchierata di Ian Tattersall. Io non ho dubbi sulla qualità di quello che ci racconterà. Un grazie al Rettore del Toni, a Nazzi e a Vianello. Devo dire soprattutto a Vianello, con il quale mantengo un rapporto costante di amicizia e di collaborazione. L'occasione è interessante, però io vorrei tornare al febbraio del 2009, quando Tattersall fa questa sua chiacchierata su in castello. Abbiamo abbandonato fuori il professor De Toni e alla fine della chiacchierata ci sono le solite domande, ce n'è una piuttosto impertinente e particolare che chiede: ma secondo lei la città di Udine deve avere un museo di storia naturale degno di questo nome? E ovviamente la domanda era provocatoria, ma ovviamente Tattersall gli risponde con una lunga chiacchierata dicendo sì, certo, non ci sono dubbi. È ovvio che il professore lo fa innanzitutto perché è una persona cortese e cordiale, ma anche perché lavora in un museo di storia naturale, quindi sa perfettamente quale sia la funzione di un museo, che è da un lato strumento di conoscenza e di crescita di questa conoscenza. Il loro lo è in maniera marcata e notevole, ma lo è anche il nostro, indubbiamente, e dall'altra parte sia uno strumento di comunicazione veramente notevole. Allora, poter dire, anzi, aver fatto vedere stamattina a Ian che il museo incomincia ad esistere, che la strada finalmente è in discesa, che si vede alla fine la luce alla fine del tunnel, per noi è una cosa importantissima. E lo è appunto, come diceva l'assessore Giacomini, nel momento in cui quest'anno festeggiamo i 150 anni del museo e quindi 150 anni dell'esistenza di questa struttura all'insieme di tutte le altre strutture culturali della città. Quindi l'occasione è assolutamente propizia. Io ringrazio tutti voi per essere qui e cedo volentieri la parola al professor Vianello che introduce il professor Tattersall. Grazie.
Ian Tattersall è curatore emerito dell'American Museum of Natural History di New York e uno dei massimi studiosi di paleoantropologia del mondo. Ha partecipato a numerose spedizioni per svolgere ricerche sul campo in Madagascar, Yemen, Vietnam. Si è occupato dell'analisi di fossili di ominidi, ma si è pure dedicato allo studio della tassonomia e dell'ecologia dei lemuri del Madagascar. Oltre ad aver pubblicato numerosi lavori scientifici, Ian Tattersall è anche autore di diversi saggi, alcuni dei quali di carattere squisitamente divulgativo. Consapevole dell'ineguatezza della letteratura esistente per comparare i fossili di ominidi, con Jeffrey Schwartz ha pubblicato un saggio di 3 volumi intitolato Human Fossil Record, in cui, attraverso protocolli descrittivi e fotografici, rende possibile il confronto tra reperti fossili di differente provenienza. Per comprendere pienamente il contributo di Ian Tattersall alla conoscenza dell'evoluzione degli ominidi, è necessario premettere alcuni concetti su tale fenomeno. È ormai evidente che la nostra specie, Homo Sapiens, si è evoluta da scimmie antropomorfe a partire da circa 6-7 milioni di anni fa. Ma, come ci hanno dimostrato recenti studi di genomica comparata, abbiamo ancora nei nostri cromosomi geni di batteri, rettili, anfibi e chissà cosa poi ancora, che costituiscono un retaggio della nostra storia evolutiva. In altri termini, siamo connessi a tutti gli altri organismi viventi nel grande albero della vita, già intuito e descritto da Charles Darwin nella sua fondamentale opera L'origine delle specie per selezione naturale. Solo una piccolissima parte di questo grande albero, peraltro apparsa di recente, è occupata da ominidi, tra cui più specie appartenenti al genere Homo. Per fare solo un esempio, 40.000 anni fa convivevano Homo Sapiens, Homo erectus, Homo Neanderthalensis e Homo floresiensis. Possiamo dire che non eravamo per niente gli unici. Come è noto, l'evoluzione delle specie si basa sul binomio variazione-selezione naturale. Tutti gli organismi viventi sono tra di loro differenti. Su questa diversità agisce l'ambiente, che attua una cernita, cioè una selezione dei più adatti. Questo è il nucleo della teoria darwiniana o adattazionismo. Tra il 1915 e il 1932 del secolo scorso, questa teoria venne aggiornata e corroborata attraverso l'utilizzo di conoscenze provenienti da una nuova disciplina, la genetica di popolazione, che permise di spiegare l'evoluzione sulla base delle variazioni nelle frequenze dei fattori responsabili dei vari caratteri, i cosiddetti alleli, nei pool genetici delle popolazioni che formano ovviamente le specie. Questa spiegazione è alla base della nuova sintesi o neodarwinismo, che fu il risultato dell'attività di un gruppo di genetisti matematici, tra cui Ronald Fisher, Sewell Wright, John Helden. Questa sintesi fu poi avviata a completamento nel 1937 con l'opera di insigni naturalisti, tra cui Theodosius Dobzhansky, Ernst Mayr, George Gaylord Simpson e John Ledyard Stebbins. Sia il darwinismo che il neodarwinismo prevedono che l'evoluzione sia lineare e progressiva, una linea così che sale, allo scopo di generare specie sempre più adatte alle prevalenti condizioni ambientali. Tuttavia, nel corso del 1972, Stephen Jay Gould e Niles Eldredge, sulla base dell'analisi dei resti fossili di organismi in periodi di tempo molto lunghi, si resero conto che questo modello era inadeguato. L'evoluzione poteva essere meglio descritta come un fenomeno caratterizzato da lunghi periodi di stasi, in cui succede poco o niente, punteggiati, cioè interrotti, da rapidi cambiamenti, in cui compaiono nuove specie. Da cui in tutto questo processo la contingenza, intesa come fenomeni imprevedibili, svolge un ruolo chiaramente cruciale. Ebbene, Ian Tattersall, sulla scorta di queste nuove acquisizioni, capì che anche l'evoluzione degli ominidi può essere descritta con questo modello. Una versione divulgativa di tale straordinaria intuizione la possiamo trovare nel suo libro La scimmia allo specchio. Gli interessi di questo grande studioso si sono però rivolti anche agli aspetti che rendono Homo Sapiens unico, cioè le lingue e il pensiero simbolico. Questo tema è in particolare affrontato nel suo libro I signori del pianeta, la ricerca delle origini dell'uomo, in cui l'autore con grande lucidità, chiarezza e competenza definisce il divario che ci separa dagli animali più vicini a noi, cioè le scimmie antropomorfe, illustrando peraltro le tappe evolutive verso l'emergere di queste peculiarità. Ciò che traspare è che la nostra specie è la sola ad aver acquisito delle capacità cognitive così spiccate, il nostro interesse per i concetti astratti, simbolici e il linguaggio, ma anche, mi permetto di aggiungere, di aver inventato l'agricoltura, a mio avviso un'altra importante rivoluzione dopo quelle sopra menzionate. In altri termini, possiamo dire, una cultura la cui profondità non è rilevabile in altre specie. Questa è la grande differenza. Ora Ian Tattersall, per spiegare tali stupefacenti emergenze, ci propone un originale meccanismo basato sul concetto di esattamento, dall'inglese exaptation, o cooptazione. Questa strategia evolutiva, peraltro già intuita da Darwin come preadattamento, è stata proposta nel 1982 da Stephen Jay Gould, ancora lui, ed Elisabeth Vrba, per andare oltre il rigido meccanismo adattativo, cioè quello darwiniano in senso stretto. In breve, per capire questo concetto, un carattere che inizialmente è stato utilizzato per svolgere una funzione, o addirittura poteva anche non avere nessuna funzione, è poi stato cooptato o esattato per svolgerne un'altra o per averne una. Un semplice esempio chiarirà tale concetto che potrebbe apparire abbastanza complicato. Pensate, le piume degli uccelli, che tutti conosciamo, si sono inizialmente evoluti come apparati di termoregolazione, per scaldarsi in altri termini, ma poi sono state appunto cooptate o esattate, come si dice, per spiccare il volo, cioè da piume a penne. Bene, caro Ian, desidero ringraziarti dal profondo del cuore per aver accettato di essere qui con noi questa sera, ospite dell'Università di Udine e del Museo Friulano di Storia naturale. È per me un privilegio averti come amico, non solo perché sei un grande scienziato, ma anche perché esprimi a livelli elevati quella grande umanità che sempre traspare dai tuoi bellissimi libri. Grazie, Ian.
And thank you, Angelo and the others, for those wonderful introductions. I really feel very humbled. I'm sorry I cannot address you in your own beautiful language. So what I'd like to do this evening is to talk a little bit about how we human beings became the extraordinary and rather improbable creatures that we are. And before I start, let me begin with something I've learned always to say when I talk about human evolution, even to very sophisticated audiences like yourselves. And that is that there can be no rational doubt that we living Homo sapiens are fully integrated into the great tree of life that Angelo mentioned and that we see on the screen here. And this tree of life truly unites all living organisms on the planet. I mean, we see this tree here in circular form, but I think you can all see the branching structure with all organisms ultimately emanating from a single common ancestor. So there's no question about it. We human beings are intimately nested into the natural world. But equally obviously, we're not simply just another run-of-the-mill primate. So a primate we certainly are, but there's nonetheless something qualitatively unique about us. And there's certainly something unique about the way in which we process information in our minds. And the key to this difference seems to be that we human beings think symbolically. And what this means is that we mentally dissect our interior and exterior worlds into a vocabulary of discrete symbols. And then we can combine and recombine those symbols according to rules to create new versions of the world around and within us and to imagine new possibilities about it. And as far as we know, no other organism does this. Now, of course, saying this is not to suggest that the cognitive processes of other primates cannot be very complex indeed. Certainly, apes can readily recognize and respond to symbols, and they can even use them additively to make and to understand simple statements like take red ball outside, as these bonobos in this picture appear to have done. But what apes evidently do not do is to engender multiple alternatives by rearranging those symbols in the human fashion. And as a result, there is a huge but hugely significant, even if narrow, gulf between the cognitive styles of other organisms and human beings. Yet, given our intimate position nested within that tree of life that we saw, there can be no rational doubt that our symbolic and linguistic species was descended from an ancestor that was neither of these two things. And so what this means is that at some point in our evolution, that symbolic and linguistic gulf must have been bridged. And so obviously the question is how? How was this gulf bridged? Well, there are basically two theoretical possibilities here. One of them is embodied in the traditional neo-Darwinian view that Angelo mentioned of evolution as being a long, slow process of modification under the guiding hand of natural selection. That view sees us basically as a better version of what went before, as the result of a gradual accretion of improvements over the eons. And there is obviously some truth in this view, because nothing about what we are today would have been possible at all without everything that had previously occurred in our evolution. But on the other hand, it's been abundantly clear for many years that the neo-Darwinian perspective actually hugely oversimplifies what actually goes on in evolution. Because if you look at them closely, the processes that promote evolutionary change turn out to be largely non-continuous. And what is more, they are affected by a host of different factors that are basically random with respect to adaptation. And this, in turn, throws wide open the possibility that our unique cognitive style might have been achieved in a short-term and definable event. Now, these two theoretical alternatives have very different implications for the kind of creature that we are. Because gradual honing by natural selection implies that we have somehow been fine-tuned by nature to behave in particular ways. While in contrast, a short-term origin of the unique human capacity might suggest that there is something adventitious and emergent about us. So, how do we choose between these two options? And in fact, we'll find that only empirical evidence will help us here. And since cognition itself is obviously something that doesn't preserve directly, and because such things as brain size and the external morphology of the brain have proven rather disappointing as cognitive indicators, we really only have two places to look for such evidence. One of those places is the overall pattern that we see in human evolution. And the other one, of course, is the archaeological record, which is the rather selective register of ancient hominid behaviors. So let's start with the second of these. For the Pleistocene Epoch, which is roughly the 2 million years over which our genus Homo has evolved, the material record of hominid behaviors is pretty straightforward. It consists, for the most part, of stone tools and butchered animal bones, and of the ways in which these elements are spatially disposed at occupation sites like the one we see here. But although technological indicators like these ones here that we see may, in the aggregate, may overall be indicative of general complexities of lifestyle, although they're good as general indicators, but none of them is a good proxy for any specifiable cognitive condition. We can't read what was going on in the minds of the people who left these traces. What's more, scientists in different disciplines, and even within the same discipline, have differed wildly in their views as to what is an acceptable archaeological proxy for language and for symbolic thought. But nonetheless, while many Paleolithic stone-making techniques are certainly witness to very cognitive, very sophisticated cognitive states, the hominids who made these tools here, we see here, which are about a million years old, were very clever indeed. It seems to me that few indicators of this kind can be used in isolation to infer the specifically modern cognitive style. And that's especially true in view of the fact that learning by imitation can extend to some extremely complex processes indeed. And for the most part, to cut a long story short, that leaves us only with explicitly symbolic artifacts as reliable proxies for the specifically modern symbolic cognitive style. But then again, opinions legitimately differ as to what can and cannot be considered a symbolic artifact. So can we consider as symbolic a roughly altered lump of stone like the one that you see on the screen, something that looks vaguely anthropomorphic to the modern eye? Were colored gastropod shells like these, which were presumptively pierced for stringing, were they necessarily part of a symbolic ornamentation system? Does the simple presence of ground ochre in archaeological deposits necessarily imply that this ochre was used symbolically? Because ochre has functional uses as well as symbolic ones. So there are always going to be difficult cases like these. But certainly certain early expressions were more overtly symbolic. Most convincing, I think, as material symbolic indicators are realistic representations like this one, which was produced 20,000 years ago by an artist who I think we can all agree was the cognitive equal of anybody in this room. But perhaps more importantly, symbolic thought allows hominids with clever hands not only to remake the world in their minds, but to shape the world around them in unprecedentedly complex ways. And that amazing ability to alter the world should surely express itself in some visible inflection in the archaeological record. So with all this in mind, it seems worthwhile to look briefly back over the long record of the hominid family to see at what point in human evolution we are reasonably able to infer the possession of modern symbolic behaviors among our predecessors. But I think that first I should briefly return to that other potential indicator of evolutionary pattern that I just mentioned. And that concerns both the shape of the human family tree itself and the processes that gave rise to this tree. So take a look at this very provisional hominid genealogical tree that we see here and see that it reveals a very bushy form indeed. Typically, as you can see, multiple hominid lineages flourished in parallel, with as many as 7 of them coexisting at any one time. And this takes us a very long way away from the old story of a single-minded struggle from primitiveness to perfection within a central lineage leading to Homo sapiens. A tree of this sort shows us that the hominid evolutionary story cannot have been one of gradual and continuous improvement. Rather, it involved a generation of diversity. What we see happening here is that the hominid family tossed out numerous different variants to compete on the ecological stage, just as you'd expect for any normal, successful mammalian group. And some of those variants just happened to succeed, while most of them didn't. Now, this pattern that we see here speaks, I think, very eloquently about the mechanism that gave rise to it. And that mechanism was certainly not one of gradual modification. And that's what we find when we look at the fossils themselves. So let's take a look. The earliest purported hominids consist of a handful of generally poorly known and rather ill-assorted early African forms that lived between about 7 and about 4 million years ago. And all of them, including the oldest one that we see here, owe their hominid status largely to claims that they were upright bipeds when they moved on the ground. And they also show modifications of the anterior dental apparatus, including reduction of the canine tooth, which is another basic hominid characteristic. But let's look at the much better documented so-called australopiths of between about 4 and 1.5 million years ago. As we see from this reconstruction here, these relatively diminutive and short-legged human precursors were clearly bipedal when they were on the ground. But they also retained numerous features of the skeleton that indicate that they were very agile when they moved around in the trees. These guys had ape-sized brains and they had large faces, as we see in the middle here. You see a Homo sapiens on the left and a chimpanzee on the right for comparison. But not for nothing have they been called bipedal apes. But from the very beginning, these australopiths seem to have shown different ecological preferences from apes, and they exploited a much wider range of resources in the expanding African woodlands and bushlands of the time. By 3.4 million years ago, there are already strong suggestions, such as these cut-marked bones from a place called Dikika in Ethiopia, that early hominids had begun to use naturally occurring sharp stone flakes to butcher animal carcasses. Although what we traditionally think of as the earliest stone tools actually show up only significantly later at sites in Kenya and Ethiopia that date from about 2.5 million years ago. And these implements clearly show that by this point in time, hominids had moved cognitively far beyond the ape league. But despite this radically new behavior, in terms of their anatomical structure, the earliest stone tool makers seem to have been pretty much standard issue australopiths, like the one from Buri that we see here. And that gives us the first indication of another significant pattern that we find throughout the hominid fossil record. And that is that new kinds of technology do not tend to be introduced by new kinds of hominid. As far as technological innovation is concerned, the archaeological and the fossil records are clearly out of phase. And this certainly holds true for the earliest well-characterized members of our own genus Homo, whose fossils begin to be found. There they are. Whose fossils begin to be found in Africa at sites a little less than 2 million years old. Because although, as you can see, they were much more physically advanced, these hominids appear in association with very simple stone tools which were just like the ones their archaic predecessors had already been making for 500,000 years. Still, in other ways, these early Homo, who belonged to the species Homo Ergaster, were radically new creatures. They were tall, as you see, they were slender, they were long-legged, and they had brains that were already significantly expanded beyond ape volumes. And physically, they were suited for life in the spreading savannas far away from the shelter of the trees. And for energetic reasons, it's reasonable to conclude that they had already assumed an at least partly predatory way of life, as represented here. But once again, it took a while before hominids of this kind started regularly to manufacture a new kind of stone implement, the large and bifacially flaked so-called hand axe that was made to a predetermined form. But once again, although several different species of Homo apparently came and went in the intervening period, it was not until over 1 million years later that a conceptually new kind of stone tool began to be regularly used. This was the so-called prepared core tool, such as the one we see in this picture, in which a stone nucleus was elaborately worked on both sides until a final blow would detach a more or less finished implement that we see in the foreground. And once again, these conceptually more advanced, more complex tools appeared well within the tenure of an existing species. In this case, the species concerned was the the world's first cosmopolitan hominid, Homo heidelbergensis. This species showed up in both Africa and in Europe at about 600,000 years ago. And it had a brain that was within the low end of the size range of modern Homo sapiens, although that range is very large. Now, within the time span of heidelbergensis, several other radical technological innovations were also introduced. These innovations included the hafting of stone tools into handles. It included the construction of shelters, deliberately constructed shelters like this one. We begin to find the regular use of domestic fire at campsites, and we find the first finely shaped wooden throwing spears. But significantly, nothing produced in this period is uncontestably symbolic. Quite evidently, it was possible to be resourceful and smart and behaviorally flexible and technologically sophisticated in the absence of symbolic reasoning, or at least of any deeply embedded inclination to express this cognitive style. And what is more, we can say the very same thing for Homo Neanderthalensis, which evolved from indigenous European predecessors at around 200,000 years ago and has a wonderful fossil record here in Italy. Now, the Neanderthals had brains as big as ours. You can see in this skull is very voluminous, and they were wonderful craftsmen in stone, as you can see in these tools here. And these Neanderthals left us an incomparable record of very complex lives. They flourished in an age of very difficult climates. They hunted some fearsomely large animals, and at least occasionally they buried their dead. But despite some equivocal and disputed expressions in very late times, the Neanderthals bequeathed us very little convincing evidence that they possessed any consistent tradition of symbolic activity. And in a record that was as geographically and temporally and materially expansive as their record was, if the Neanderthals had been symbolic thinkers, they would surely have left us some more convincing evidence of this fact. Now, by saying this, I'm not trying to disparage the Neanderthals in any way. Clearly, they were extremely complex beings, and they were very clever exploiters of their environment. But it is hard to avoid the impression that they interacted with the world around them very differently from the way in which we do. And even more amazingly, the same identical thing appears to have been true of the earliest fossil representatives of our very anatomically distinctive species, Homo sapiens. Fossils that showed substantially modern morphologies, like the one we see here from a place called Rettore in Ethiopia, have been found in sites dating between about 200 and 160,000 years ago. And these early anatomically modern humans are associated with some notably archaic toolkits, including this very late hand axe, also from Rettore. Now, obviously, members of our species eventually began to reason symbolically, or we wouldn't be here discussing the subject today. But it's not until around 100,000 years ago that we start to find the first plausible indications of this unprecedented kind of activity among humans. And again, those early indications show up at sites in Africa and nearby. At about this time, pierced marine shell beads and ochre deposits begin to show up at sites around the Mediterranean and in South Africa. Now, such things as this may be arguable on their own as indicators of modern cognition, as I've already suggested. But they are soon supplemented by more direct evidence of symbolism. The best evidence of this kind comes from Middle Stone Age occupation strata at a place called Blombos Cave on the southern African coast. And these items are dated to about 77,000 years ago. And these layers have yielded two smoothed ochre plaques of slightly different ages that bear basically the same engraved geometric design. And here's one of them. Now, fossils are pretty rare from this particular time and area, but there's very little doubt that items such as this were produced by Homo sapiens. And as a result of this evidence, I think a fairly firm scenario of human origins and geographical dispersion is beginning to emerge. What seems to have happened is that Homo sapiens, like this one here, appeared as distinctive anatomical entities in Africa at around 200,000 years ago. At first, members of the new species behaved in much the same way as their predecessors had behaved and their hominid contemporaries behaved. But by around 100,000 years ago, or soon after that, they began to show new and unprecedented behaviors, including the production of symbolic objects. Here's that plaque again. And very soon after that, as this map shows, populations descended from those first symbolic human species, exited the continent of Africa, and very rapidly took over the world. Earlier, non-symbolic Homo sapiens had forayed into the Levant, and they had not displaced the resident Neanderthal, so they didn't even gain a lasting foothold there. But these later symbolic immigrants from Africa clearly had a cognitive edge that allowed them to very rapidly displace the hominid competition throughout Eurasia. From Homo erectus in the Far East to Homo Neanderthalensis in the Far West, all hominid competitors promptly disappeared. In the best documented case we have of early behaviorally modern penetration of remote regions of Eurasia, the dazzling tradition of European cave art was already underway by about 40,000 years ago. And it was accompanied by an amazing record of musical instruments like this, and notations on plaques, and portable art like this. And what's more, this rock image of a babirusa, a sort of a local pig from Sulawesi in Indonesia, was recently dated to 40,000 years ago. And this suggests to me that the tradition of representational art that we see both in Europe and in Asia had originated earlier yet, maybe 10,000 years earlier, and probably, I think, in Africa. Now, of course, human beings are complex creatures that were descended from complex precursors. And from time to time, we do find unusual expressions in the record left by those precursors. Here's one of those expressions. It's a 500,000-year-old pattern of incisions on a mollusk shell that was found at Trinil in Java in putative association with Homo erectus. And here's another example, an engraving that was found in Gibraltar recently at a living site that was associated with very late Neanderthals. But as they say, one swallow does not make a summer. And these intriguing items here are really floating points that were not embedded in any identifiable symbolic tradition. Whereas, in amazing contrast, the entire tenor of human life was clearly and dramatically changing in the later African Middle Stone Age. So in the period between about 100 and 40,000 years ago, a fundamental behavioral change, a transformation in Homo sapiens was sparking a revolution in the way in which hominids did business in the world. Previously, hominids had met environmental challenges by adapting old technologies to new purposes, rather than by inventing new technologies to deal with new conditions. And hence the typical stasis that we saw in toolkits. Nothing changed for hundreds of thousands of years. But with the emergence of behaviorally modern Homo sapiens, a totally unprecedented entity was on the scene. And it was an entity that clearly possessed the very same restless appetite for change that increasingly dominates our own lives today. So, how do we explain this rapid emergence of the extraordinarily and basically unprecedented new neophiliac phenomenon of symbolic Homo sapiens? Well, long-term natural selection is clearly no answer here. because we have a dramatically short-term event that clearly took place within the tenure of an existing species, as indeed in evolutionary terms it had to have done. Because the biological underpinnings, the neural structure that permits modern humans to make the complex associations that are involved in symbolic thought must necessarily have been in place before the new cognitive proclivity could be expressed. And that was the radical developmental reorganization that resulted some 200,000 years ago in the highly derived skeletal anatomy of the new species Homo sapiens. So you can see how very distinctive we are by comparing the modern human skeleton on the right here with that of a Neanderthal on the left, which is a pretty standard issue Middle Pleistocene hominid. And whatever it may have been, the genetic innovation that we see reflected here was plausibly rather a minor one at the molecular level. And it probably involved changes in gene expression rather than changes in the structural genome itself. But it evidently had cascading developmental consequences throughout the body from head to toe. And there's no reason to believe that those consequences should necessarily have been confined to the skeletal and dental systems, which are all that we have preserved in the fossil record. However, the new cognitive potential that was created at that time evidently then lay fallow for a short but significant period of time. During this time, anatomical Homo sapiens continued to behave in the old manner, and it produced an unremarkable archaeological record. But then something happened to stimulate the recruitment of the new potential, much as ancestral birds, as Angelo mentioned, rather tardily discovered that they could use their feathers to fly. And of course, the stimulus concerned was necessarily a purely cultural stimulus, a behavioral one. So, what was that stimulus? And by far the most plausible candidate that we have, I think, is the invention of language. And several factors combine to make language particularly attractive as the cultural releaser of symbolic thought. First, language is the ultimate symbolic activity. And indeed, from our modern perspective, it's virtually impossible to imagine our thought in isolation from language. My colleague, the linguist Wolfram Hinson, has recently recalled that a close connection between grammar and thought was a very consistent theme in early studies of generative grammar. And he's provided very persuasive arguments for reviving the view that language and thought are not two independent domains of inquiry. In other words, among modern humans, language and thought are so closely intertwined that they appear to be functionally, even if not conceptually, inseparable. Now, in terms of interpreting the material archaeological record, you can, of course, object that while all modern human beings are symbolic, they do not all necessarily leave traces of this proclivity of the kind that might be preserved in the material record. But over the long haul and over the entire expanse of its distribution, I think any species that processed information in the modern human manner would surely be expected to have left some trace, some consistent material indication of its unusual cognitive status, just as our own species has so clearly done in recent millennia. And we simply do not find anything like this in association with any extinct hominid species, even those big-brained and very well-documented Neanderthals. What's more, there is no compelling reason to believe that the invention of language by a biologically predisposed hominid could not have been a virtually instantaneous event. On a theoretical level, for example, Noam Chomsky and his colleagues have recently argued that the algorithmic basis of language is actually extremely simple. And structured sign languages have been observed to emerge virtually instantaneously among communities of modern deaf children. Now, this property of suddenness not only makes language a particularly credible driver of symbolic reasoning, but it also distinguishes it from all other rival stimulants of symbolic thought, such as theory of mind. And what's more, language is an externalized attribute that would have been poised to spread very rapidly within a population that, as you'll remember, was already biologically prepared to receive it. So in this scenario I'm offering you, language and symbolic thought are inextricably entwined. And the two of them were more or less simultaneously acquired by Homo sapiens in a single, short feedback event that was recent and emergent, and that was exaptive rather than adaptive. Now, exaptation is, of course, as we heard from Angelo, the routine evolutionary process whereby novelties arise in contexts entirely different from the ones in which they will be eventually co-opted. And very neatly, this same evolutionary mechanism also explains how the very highly derived modern vocal tract was in place at precisely the point at which it was needed for the expression of language. As you can see from this diagram, the proportions of the upper vocal tract that permit articulate speech are very different in the modern human on the left from the Neanderthal on the right, which is a fairly standard primitive hominid. And essential as those proportions are for producing speech, they probably actually originated as no more than an incidental byproduct of the retraction of the face below the front of the brain case, which is the most notable cranial specialization of Homo sapiens. And if that's true, the long-running argument over the condition of the larynx and the various other structures of the upper vocal tract among fossil hominids is pretty much irrelevant to the precise point in history at which language was acquired. Of course, the vocal tract was there first, as of course it had to be. Now, all this having been said, there's no doubt, of course, that we share vastly more similarities with our closest relatives in nature today than we show differences from them. And for all of its peculiarities, our cognitive style is clearly built on a long and complex series of acquisitions over 400 million years of vertebrate brain evolution. Yet, our unique mode of information processing was clearly acquired amazingly recently in an abrupt event that was entirely random with respect to adaptation. And that, in turn, strongly suggests that we human beings have not been programmed by millions of years of evolution to behave in specific ways, as some scientists like to suggest. And knowing this fundamental fact is incredibly important, I think, because it helps us to understand a lot about ourselves. It helps us, for example, to explain why our decision-making processes are typically so messy. They were not optimized. And it makes clear to us why, for all of our amazing rational powers, our behaviors are so often irrational and self-destructive and short-termist. Because again, they were not optimized. And I think understanding this geometry of events even helps us to understand why the human psyche itself is so famously murky and impenetrable. It most certainly was not optimized. And of course, all of this implies that we have a lot of responsibility for the ways in which we act. We can't blame evolution. And thank you all for listening and for your patience. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Ian, for this wonderful talk. Abbiamo imparato così tante cose. Ha reso conto sia della nostra intelligenza che della nostra stupidità, come avete visto alla fine. Quindi decisamente ha chiuso un cerchio in questa sua straordinaria conferenza.
Thank you to the University of Udine for the invitation to be here. Thank you.